It was another era, another time, when our nation and its allies were united in a deep-seated desire for the preservation of ideals. A clear conscience and a strong resolve inspired all who served and defined their goal. Born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and raised in quiet country towns of northwest Wisconsin, Ed Preter led a simple life. But on Labor Day weekend in 1939, his world and the world as we knew it was changed indelibly. Germany's invasion of Poland, for all practical purposes, signaled the start of World War II. On that day, 14-and-a-half-year-old Ed, his sister, and his parents were on an extended weekend car trip to Canada. When they arrived in a small Canadian town on the morning of September 3rd, they were greeted by droves of newsboys hawking special edition newspapers announcing that England and France had declared war on Germany. The news would change Ed's life, and that of all Americans, and the world forever. The war in Europe hit home for Ed's family. Both of his parents had siblings living in Belgium. With Hitler's sudden invasion of Poland, it seemed just a matter of time before Belgium and other countries would fall to the Germans. Ed's mother survived the German occupation of Belgium during World War I. She knew firsthand of the horrors of German warfare tactics. But she, like the rest of the world, had no concept of the monster that was Adolf Hitler. By May of 1940, Germany invaded and occupied Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France in clinical fashion of just 3 short weeks. Hitler's army showed no mercy for the native populations. Conquest of the enemy was accomplished at any cost. December 7, 1941. A massive Japanese bomber fleet attacks and decimates the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Scores of planes and ships are bruised and battered, many demolished beyond repair. Equipment and air supplies are reduced to smoldering ruins. More than 3,000 Americans are killed or severely wounded. More costly to Japan, though, is the effectiveness of this foul attack in immediately unifying America in its determination to fight and win the war thrust upon it, and to win and protect the peace that will surely follow. At Pearl Harbor, ever is written a history that 130 million Americans will never forget. In days to come, Japan too will remember Pearl Harbor. Like most Americans, Ed and his family huddled around the family radio console that Sunday afternoon, listening to trickling radio reports of the massacre at Pearl Harbor. December 8, 1941, Durand, Wisconsin. High school principal Mr. Larson calls for an emergency student assembly in the school auditorium. Except for a lone console model radio, the stage stands empty. Ed and his high school colleagues sit quietly as they listen to President Roosevelt declare war on the Empire of Japan.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, no matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion. The American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Despite efforts to enlist early in the armed services, Ed had to wait until he reached 18 years of age on January 30th, 1943. After completing his freshman year at Marquette University, he voluntarily entered the service and was assigned to the U.S. Army. By 1945, Germany's troops were in steady retreat. Starting with D-Day, the Allied thrust across France and into Germany met with weakening resistance. But German forces mounted deadly pocket resistance in their retreat. Allied forces needed one more massive military surge to crush the Germans. The answer came in the capable form of the Army Ground and Air Force. After 2 years of intense training in 1943 and 1944, Ed Preter emerged as an aviation officer-navigator in the esteemed 8th Army Air Force. His 96th Bomb Group, 339th Bomb Squadron, was dispatched for bomber duty in Europe and stationed in the otherwise quiet countryside near Quindenham, England. Most Army heavy bombers, such as the B-17 Flying Fortress, flew with a crew of 9, including 2 pilots, a bombardier, a navigator, a flight engineer, and several gunners. It took over a year to train each of these men, but no amount of preparation could diminish the anticipation crews felt while waiting for their first combat mission. February 6, 1945, Ed's first mission. The heavily laden B-17 plane, often at risk for collisions with other group bombers as it slowly climbs to an operational altitude of over 20,000 feet, is on its way. At this height, almost 5 miles straight up, the crew needs to breathe oxygen in order to survive. If the oxygen system malfunctions, the crew will lose consciousness after only 60 seconds. After 20 minutes, they will die. The extreme cold at this altitude is another serious hazard. Temperatures commonly drop to minus 40 degrees or lower. The men are dependent on newly designed electrically heated flight suits that are often faulty. Removing gloves to make repairs or treat the wounded can result in grave consequences, including frostbite or even death. As Ed looks around, he is thrilled to behold a sea of friendly Air Corps bombers ahead and behind him for as far as he can see. As the crew crosses the Dutch coast en route to Germany, they welcome the arrival of the P-51 Mustang fighter escorts, known as the Little Friends. The P-51 service in World War II will change the outcome of the entire campaign. On missions where bomber visibility was limited or even impossible, Bomber Command would instead designate an entire city as the target. At the height of the campaign, as many as 1,000 bombers at a time would drop combinations of explosives and incendiaries on cities such as Hamburg and Cologne in an effort to start firestorms that would burn them to the ground. On Ed's first bomber mission, Target Chemnitz is protected with a large number of flak guns. Throughout the attack, there is a steady stream of enemy flak. Black puffs at plane altitude explode all around. The crew is steadily bounced about by the flak bursts and report damage to the aircraft itself. But the mission is ultimately a success. After 9 hours in the air, the crew returns to base, where they receive a warm welcome followed by 2-ounce shots of bourbon whiskey. Just 8 days later, the crew again attacked the Chemnitz stronghold. Throughout his war experience, Ed always carried with him a rosary, which he received from an officer who had just finished his bombing missions for the Air Corps. An original crew navigator of the 96th had started a tradition of passing the rosary on to the next replacement navigator when his mission of duty was complete. Ed was handed the rosary from navigator Emmett Brown, who was to die later in a massive collision over the North Sea. To this day, Ed still carries that crucifix whenever he travels. It has served him well. Ed's crew went on to fly 28 missions in Germany and 2 final missions in Royan, France. In April 1945, after the crew successfully completed its 30th mission, military protocol called for a cessation of aviation duty. Ed was now bound for a slow return back to civilian life in America. By April 1st of 1945, Ed had been promoted to first lieutenant with extensive military commendations, including the esteemed Air Medal and its 4 accompanying bronze clusters. After his bombing missions, Ed continued to be stationed near Quindenham, England, site of St. Andrew's Church. There he continued his pilot training and also found time for occasional 3-day trips to London and plenty of bridge playing. There was also a curious problem at the time on the base, a Tunisian donkey named Lady Mo. When the 96th had led the August 1943 shuttle mission bombing Regensburg and continuing to North Africa, one of the crew members snuck the donkey back in the return mission. A flight surgeon had devised an oxygen mask for the donkey because it could not have survived the high altitude without oxygen. Lady Mo's presence on the bombing mission qualified her as the only U.S. Army jackass ever known to fly a combat mission. Lady Mo roamed around the base and got to be quite a celebrity in Snetterton Heath. She took several trips to London, even marching once in the parade at Trafalgar Square. She served in 1945 as the Army's mascot of the Army-Navy football game held at London's White Stadium. On one occasion, she was served ice cream by Princess, now Queen, Elizabeth. She served as an observer on the control tower and even helped promote sales of war bonds. As the war in Europe was coming to a rapid close, no one knew what to do with a furry friend, but Lady Mo solved the problem for them. She wandered one day onto a railroad track alongside of the airfield. Her sudden demise arrived in the form of a train that was passing through the base area. Surrounded by grieving soldiers, she was buried on base with full military honors, the Queen of the Heath. Ed returned to Wisconsin on January 29, 1946, the day before his 21st birthday. After warm hugs with friends and family in Durand, Wisconsin, Ed eventually returned to Marquette University's School of Engineering program. There, he would eventually meet and befriend 2 of his closest colleagues, Bernie Flatley and Tim Goss, 3 war heroes back on the Marquette campus for the welcome commencement of civilian life.